Week 9 Overview, Monroe and the American Hemisphere. This week we'll finish up Unit 1, The Age of Napoleon. Europe, which had been so ravaged by war, was at peace for the first time in decades. The young United States were booming. During this period there was only one truly meaningful political party in the U.S. The American economy was growing quickly and the effects of the Industrial Revolution were beginning to be felt. Things were going so well during President Monroe's 2 terms that this period of American history is known as the Era of Good Feeling. Things were not so good in South America, which had thrown off Spanish rule without learning the art of self-government. We'll conclude our study of Simón Bolívar and his independence movement in South America by watching his dreams of freedom and unity fade. We studied Bolívar's youth and first battles with Spain 2 weeks ago. Last week we covered the creation of Gran Colombia, the union of what is now Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. This week we'll finish out his career. Bolívar's next goal after establishing Gran Colombia was to liberate Quito, a city which was to become the capital of Ecuador. This was a very difficult endeavor since he had to move through one of the most dangerous sections of the Andes Mountains. The natives in those mountains were completely hostile to him and his quest for independence. At the Battle of Bombona, however, in 1822, his little army of 2,000 men won a dramatic victory over Spanish forces who had every military advantage. Then Bolívar sent one of his best generals on to Quito. Antonio Sucre drove the Spanish from the city. Ecuador promptly joined Gran Colombia. The next battle was for Peru. While Bolívar had been leading the northern part of South America to independence, a man named General San Martin had been doing the same thing in the south. Martin helped liberate Argentina in 1813, Chile in 1818, and then began to work on Peru. He served the whole independence movement by giving it specific shape and focus. He came up with a name for the armed forces, the Independents. He devised a flag and articulated a set of principles by which the independents could conduct themselves and by which they could be known. These 2 strong leaders could have clashed with each other or joined forces. Curiously, however, after Bolívar met with San Martin in 1822, San Martin suddenly left Peru, resigned the command of his army, and within a year moved to France. No one is truly sure why this happened. What we do know is that Bolívar took over San Martin's quest to liberate Peru. It was the last South American country to declare independence. There was little desire for independence there, but Bolívar reasoned that if the Spanish had any American territory left, they'd use it as a staging ground to reconquer the rest of South America. Bolívar and Sucre successfully defeated the Spanish in 1824, and Peru declared itself an independent republic in 1825. The highlands, then known as Upper Peru, renamed itself Bolivia in honor of Bolívar and asked Bolívar to become dictator. He accepted the title and spent 3 years trying to establish a real republic there. Afterwards he returned to Gran Colombia to resume his post as president for life, but unfortunately all was not well. Several of his generals and fellow leaders had been working for their own personal ambition, and they resented his position as president for life, viewing it as a power grab. They began to criticize him loudly and harshly, stirring up dissension and fomenting military takeovers. Bolívar called for a new constitution for Gran Colombia, but the process led to chaos. He decided he had to intervene. Reluctantly, he became dictator of Gran Colombia in 1828. His health began to decline as his friends and fellow leaders turned on him. He survived an assassination attempt in 1828, but this seems to have struck an emotional death blow from which he never recovered. In 1830 he resigned as leader of Gran Colombia in an attempt to preserve its unity, but by this time the internal strife was too great. Eventually, Gran Colombia dissolved, becoming the modern nations of Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, plus parts of Costa Rica, Peru, Brazil, and Guyana. Bolívar, heartbroken, prepared to go into exile in Europe, but he died of tuberculosis in December of 1830 before he could leave. So, things went downhill in South America, but in the United States, things just seemed to be getting better and better. James Monroe, the 5th President of the United States, was a Virginian who had joined the Continental Army at the age of 18 and risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel. During the war, he met Thomas Jefferson, who became his teacher and lifelong friend. Monroe was elected to the Virginia Assembly in 1782 and to the Continental Congress in 1784. He married in 1786 and had 2 daughters. Monroe ran against James Madison for a seat in the first U.S. House of Representatives and lost, but was soon appointed by the Virginia legislature to a vacancy in the U.S. Senate. There he helped to found the Democratic-Republican Party. Washington made him a minister to France, but after he criticized the Jay Treaty between the U.S. and Britain, he was recalled. In 1799, Monroe was elected governor of Virginia, but Jefferson sent him back to France to negotiate for the purchase of New Orleans. By the time he got there, Napoleon decided to offer America the entire Louisiana Territory. Monroe said yes on the spot. From there he was sent to Spain and then to England, where he negotiated a trade treaty that was so bad Jefferson refused to submit it to the Senate. Monroe was elected governor of Virginia again, but quickly resigned to serve as James Madison's Secretary of State. When the War of 1812 began, Monroe wanted to take command of the army, but Madison kept him in his cabinet. When the Secretary of War had to resign because of neglect of duty, however, Monroe took over that department while still remaining Secretary of State. American victories during his tenure greatly increased his popularity, and he rode that popularity to the presidency in 1816. James Monroe's presidency is typically known as the era of good feeling. That's because America entered a phase of general peace, both at home and abroad. With the Napoleonic Wars finally over, America no longer had to worry about blockades or embargoes, allowing the trading economy to prosper. At home, the nation was quickly expanding westward, and with the disappearance of the Federalist Party, there were few party-induced political disputes. The economy was prospering, people were happy, and everything was looking up. That's not to say that the 8 years of Monroe's presidency were uneventful. It was a busy time as well as a happy one. You may recall how Henry Clay of Kentucky had come up with a plan he called the American System, which was designed to boost the economy. He wanted the federal government to build new roads and canals to boost the West and enact a tariff to support northern manufacturing. Monroe vetoed several bills for Clay's American System, not because he didn't like the idea, but because he didn't think the Constitution authorized such acts. He urged Congress to draft a constitutional amendment to give them that authority. In 1824, under relentless political pressure, he finally signed a bill that planned improvements for the future. Probably the biggest conflict of Monroe's presidency began when Missouri applied for admission to the Union as a slave state. This was a problem because, with Missouri entering as a slave state, the delicate balance between slave and free states in the Union would be disrupted. The Mason-Dixon line divided slave and free states in the east, and the Ohio River separated them in the Midwest, but there was no natural boundary to slavery west of the Mississippi. In 1820, they finally compromised. Missouri would be admitted as a slave state, Maine would be admitted as a free state, and the border of Missouri would mark the boundary for slavery throughout the Louisiana Purchase. But instead of allowing slavery in every territory north of Missouri, the compromise took the southern border as the boundary. If you look at a map, you'll see how Missouri's southern border, the dividing line between slavery and freedom, stretches west all the way out to Nevada. By far the most successful action taken by Monroe was his declaration of the Monroe Doctrine, which was to shape American foreign policy for the next 100 years. It flowed out of a fear that Spain might attempt to regain its colonies in Central and South America, and possibly the new French monarchy would try to help. The new South American republics were valuable trading partners for the United States and Britain, and the two countries considered releasing a joint warning against European aggression in the Western Hemisphere. However, Monroe's Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, advised against it, not wanting America to get swallowed up in Britain's shadow. Instead, he argued, America should issue the warning alone, since Britain would likely continue to support it even if they didn't have an agreement with America. Thus, America would reap all the benefits of an alliance without having to actually make one. Plus, the warning would apply to Britain as well as the rest of Europe. Monroe took Adams's advice, and on December 2, 1823, he declared that America would support the nations of the Western Hemisphere against any actions by the Europeans to oppress them or control their destiny in any way. He also declared the Americas off limits for any further European colonization. Europe listened, although, to be honest, it was mainly because of the threat of the British Navy. This doctrine actually strained relations between the United States and the Latin American countries it was supposedly supporting. They feared the U.S. and resented its intrusion into their affairs. However, the doctrine was rarely used until the 1890s. On other fronts, Monroe managed to acquire Florida from Spain. He signed the Rush-Bagot Agreement with Britain to limit naval forces on the Great Lakes. The northern border between the U.S. and Canada was established to the Rocky Mountains, and the British consented to joint occupation of the Oregon Territory. During this time, Monroe ran for re-election unopposed and received every vote cast in the Electoral College except for one, which was cast for John Quincy Adams in order to preserve Washington as the only unanimously elected President of the United States. After retiring from office, Monroe returned to Virginia, where he served as a regent of the University of Virginia, once again following in Jefferson's footsteps. He became presiding officer of the Virginia Constitutional Convention, and finally was forced to move to New York City to live with his daughter because he was so impoverished after a long career of public service. Monroe died on July 4, 1831. Monroe's era of good feelings wraps up the first 9 weeks of Tapestry of Grace Year 3. Napoleon's wars battered Europe and shook South America free of Spain, but they spurred the infant industries in the United States to replace the goods Americans used to get from Europe. When trade resumed after the war, American goods found markets at home and abroad. With peace abroad, prosperity at home, and only one political party to speak of, a remarkably united America finished off the first quarter of the 19th century.